That morning began very quietly. I was standing in the living room, a cup of coffee still warm in my hand, when the door opened. All three of my children walked in at the same time. No warning. No one asked whether it was a good moment. They sat down and placed several stacks of papers neatly on the table. The documents were already clipped together, tabs marked, pens laid beside them. Everything looked very orderly. Too orderly. My oldest daughter looked at me and said in a tone so calm it sent a chill through me, "Mom, you just need to sign here. Everything will be simpler." Strangely, I didn't feel afraid. I felt only one thing, very clearly. I had not been invited into this conversation. I was standing in the middle of something that had already been arranged, and I understood right then, if I had signed those papers that day, I would have lost far more than money. My name is Margaret Hale. I am 71 years old. I have been widowed for many years and live alone in the suburbs. I once had a steady job, nothing glamorous but enough to raise my children to adulthood. I am small and quiet. People often say I am gentle. Perhaps that is why they think I will always say yes, but I am no longer young, and I have never been weak. If you have ever felt dismissed simply because you are older, if you are listening to this story and see a reflection of yourself in it, stay with me until the end. Subscribe not to support me, but so we can remind each other that we are not alone in stories like this. Everything did not begin on the morning my three children brought documents to my house. It started a few months earlier on another quiet morning. It was a Tuesday. I remember clearly because I had just changed the bed sheets and was hanging laundry in the yard when the phone rang. It was the hospital. My younger sister, Helen, had just received her test results. The doctor spoke briefly and plainly without evading the issue. The illness was already in a late stage. There wasn't much time left. I stood still for a long time after that call. I didn't cry right away. I just felt empty. Helen is 4 years younger than I am. We grew up together, sharing a bedroom and every small thing we owned. After my husband passed away, it was Helen who came by often, cooking with me, sitting and listening while I talked about little things no one else ever had time to hear. The first thing I thought about wasn't money or treatment plans. I thought, I need to talk to my children. I called my oldest daughter, Linda. She is the busiest of the three. She works in finance, always in meetings, on trips, answering calls. I called 3 times. On the third time, Linda answered, "Mom, I'm about to go into a meeting." Her voice was quick and decisive. I said I needed to talk, that it was serious. I mentioned Helen. Aunt Helen, what about her? I hadn't finished my sentence when Linda let out a very soft sigh, but I heard it clearly. "Mom, can it wait? I'm really rushed. I'll call you this weekend." I said the doctor had just called. I said it was serious. I said I wasn't okay. Linda was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I understand, but I really can't deal with this right now." The call ended quickly. She didn't hang up abruptly, but she didn't leave any space for me to say more. I stood in the kitchen, the phone still in my hand. I told myself Linda was just under pressure. Her job had always been like that. I shouldn't blame her. I called my second child, my son Mark. Mark always says he's practical. He has his own family, 3 children, and expenses everywhere. He answered right away, but his tone wasn't warm. "Mom, what is it now?" I told him about Helen. I said I just needed someone to listen for a few minutes. Mark sighed. This time, he didn't hide it. "You know you've been calling a lot lately, about one thing or another. Last week it was the heater. Before that, the neighbor. I'm not saying this isn't important, but couldn't you call the doctor or some support service?" I said, "She's my sister." Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, I don't have the capacity to deal with emotions right now. I'm sorry." The call ended. No argument, no harsh words. It just stopped. I called my youngest, Emily. The phone rang for a long time. No answer. I called again, then again. Every call went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't know what to say in those few short seconds. That afternoon, I sat alone in the house. No television, no music. I didn't cry much. I just felt tired of having to organize everything in my head, tired of not knowing who to call next. What hurt me wasn't that my children didn't come right away. It was that none of them said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'm listening." No one asked how I was feeling. No one said they would call back that evening. No one paused, not even for 10 minutes. That night, Linda sent a short text. "I'll call you this weekend." Mark didn't send anything. Emily sent a heart emoji. I stared at my phone for a long time before putting it down. I wasn't angry then. I just felt one thing very clearly. When I needed my children the most, I wasn't a priority to any of them. And that was where everything began to change, though I didn't realize it yet. After that day, I stopped calling repeatedly. Not because I no longer needed to, but because I began to observe more. I wanted to understand what had changed. Or perhaps it had changed long ago, and I simply hadn't noticed. Linda had always been the child who reassured me the most. She excelled in school, worked diligently, and left this small town early in life. When my husband passed away, Linda stood beside me at the funeral, holding my hand tightly. I used to think that no matter what happened, she would never abandon her mother. However, over the years, Linda's life became increasingly full. Work, clients, and constant business trips. Whenever I called, she often replied with the exact familiar phrases. "I'm in a meeting. I'll call you back later. Let's talk properly this weekend." I didn't blame her. I honestly didn't. I knew how hard she had worked to reach that position. I used to feel proud when I heard other people mention Linda's name. One afternoon, after Helen had begun treatment, Linda called me back. The call lasted less than 10 minutes. I talked about taking Helen to the hospital. I talked about the nights I couldn't sleep. Linda was silent for a few seconds. I heard her exhale. "Mom, I don't know what to say. I'm at the office. I really can't be in this emotional space right now." For a very brief moment, I felt that Linda wanted to say something more. Her voice slowed, then stopped altogether. But in the end, she said, "I'm sorry. I have to get back to the meeting." The call ended, not because she didn't care, but because work always came first. Mark is different from Linda. He doesn't say he's busy. He says directly that he doesn't have the capacity to take on more. Mark has his own family. 3 children, tuition, mortgage payments, bills, one after another. Mark always talks about numbers, about expenses, about things that need to be handled first. When I mentioned Helen, Mark asked, "Has the doctor said anything about the treatment costs yet?" I said I hadn't thought about that. Mark was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mom, I'm not good at this kind of thing. I don't know what to say to make you feel better." Once, during a short call, Mark mentioned his father. Just one sentence. If Dad were still alive, he'd probably know what to do. After that, Mark fell silent. No one said anything else. I could hear the television on his end, the sound of children talking. Then Mark said he had to go pick up his kids. Mark isn't cold. He's just exhausted. But exhausted to the point where he has no energy left to sit with someone else's sadness. Emily is the one most like me. Quiet, easily affected. When she was little, she would sit beside me for hours without saying a word, just to feel that someone was there. Because of that, I placed the most hope in Emily. But Emily is the one who answers the phone the least. I call, it rings, then stops. I text, she reads it, but doesn't reply right away. Sometimes, hours later, she sends a concise message. "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling very okay today." Once, Emily came to visit after Helen was hospitalized. She sat in the kitchen looking out the window. I didn't talk much. I didn't press her with questions. I just cooked as I always did. When she was about to leave, Emily hugged me for a long time, longer than usual. I felt her trembling slightly, but she didn't say anything. She only said, "Make sure you take care of yourself, Mom." Later, I noticed an unsent message on my phone. I don't know what Emily had written. I could only see that she had typed something and then erased it. Maybe she wanted to say something. Maybe she didn't know how to begin. Emily isn't indifferent. She avoids sadness by retreating into silence. My 3 children, each in a different way. None of them is a bad person. None of them intentionally tried to hurt me. But when I needed them the most, none of them were there. And that truth, no matter how gently it arrives, is still enough to cool the human heart. I don't sit around counting what I've done for my children. I've never thought of family as a ledger of debts. However, there are moments when memories come to me on their own, especially when I am alone in a quiet house. I remember the night Linda called me many years ago during a heavy rain. Her voice was shaking as she said her marriage had ended. She didn't ask me what to do. She only said, "Mom, I can't take it anymore." The next morning, I drove more than 3 hours to get to Linda. I didn't bring advice. I brought clothes for the children, some food, and time. I stayed for weeks. I took the kids to school and cleaned the house so Linda could breathe more easily. When I returned home, my own work had been disrupted, but I never thought of it as a sacrifice. When my child needed me, I was there. That was enough. Then there was Mark. The year his company laid people off, he called me, trying to keep his voice steady. He didn't ask for money, but I heard the worry behind every sentence. I transferred money to Mark that same day. Not a lot, but enough to cover a few months of rent and give him time to find a new job. I didn't tell anyone. I never brought it up again. Even now, I'm not sure if Mark remembers it. Emily was different. She didn't call because of a single event. She slowly collapsed. Messages became less frequent. Plans were canceled. One day, the school called me and said Emily had taken time off without explanation. I took leave from work and went to her apartment. Emily lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. No crying, no talking. I stayed for many days. I didn't push her to get better. I just cooked, opened the windows, and sat beside her. When Emily began working again, I left. No one said thank you. No one needed to. I wasn't there to be acknowledged. If I were to list these things, they might sound like a long record, but to me they were simply ordinary. That was what their father had done, and what I continued to do after he passed away. Family, in my mind, worked that way. I don't resent my children. I genuinely don't. I understand that their lives are different from mine. More pressure, less time. Everyone has their own burdens to carry, but on quiet afternoons, when I remember all the times I set everything aside to be there for my children, I begin to realize something. My presence in their lives was always taken for granted, but their presence in mine was not. I don't blame them. I simply acknowledge it. And once I acknowledged that, I also realized how accustomed I had become to giving without ever asking in return. Who is here for me when I need someone? That question didn't make me angry. It only made me silent for a long time. And that silence, more than any argument ever could, began to change the way I would see everything that came after. The decision to meet a lawyer did not come in a moment of anger. It came on a very ordinary morning. I woke up early, made coffee, and sat by the window looking out at the garden behind the house. There were no interrupted calls, no unanswered messages, just a long stretch of quiet, long enough for me to hear my own thoughts clearly. I called a small law office about 20 minutes from my home. I did not go back to my old lawyer, not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted to begin this as something entirely new. The lawyer I met was named Robert Klein. His voice was calm, unhurried. We scheduled a meeting for the weekend. When I walked into his office, I didn't bring a list of complaints. I brought only a thin folder, my old will. Everything in it was clear, orderly, familiar. The assets were divided equally among my 3 children. The summer house was left for the whole family to share, a plan I had made many years ago when I still believed everything would unfold that way, naturally. Robert read it carefully. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to ask questions. When he finished, he folded the papers and looked at me. "What would you like to change?" he asked. I answered slowly, directly. I said I wanted to revise everything. I said I no longer wanted my children to be the primary beneficiaries. Robert didn't look surprised. He simply nodded and asked, "Have you thought about this for a long time?" "I'm not sure it's been a long time," I said, "but I'm very clear." I talked about the summer house. I talked about my niece, Helen's daughter. She often stopped by without any particular reason, just to have tea, to sit and talk, to ask whether I needed anything picked up. I said I wanted to leave the house to her. I discussed the organizations I had been affiliated with for many years, the library where I once worked, a patient support fund for the illness for which Helen was being treated, a small scholarship program for women returning to work after years at home. These weren't new ideas. I had thought about them for a long time. I had never put them on paper before. Robert listened. He took notes. He didn't rush me. He didn't signal approval or disapproval. When I finished, he set his pen down. "Before we go any further," he said, "I need to ask you something." He asked whether I was under pressure from anyone, whether anyone was forcing me. I shook my head. Then I asked him a question I had been thinking about since that morning. "What if I regret it?" I asked. "What if, a few years from now, I think I was too hard?" Robert didn't answer right away. He looked at me for a moment, then spoke very slowly. "You have the right to change your mind. Today, tomorrow, or at any time, as long as you are of sound mind. The law doesn't lock you into a decision just because you signed your name." That answer made me breathe a sigh of relief. I wasn't looking for absolute certainty. I just needed to know I wasn't cornering myself into a dead end. Robert explained each step, the options, the legal consequences, how to ensure that my decisions would be respected. He didn't push. He didn't say whether I should do this or not. He only said, "This is your right." When I signed the request to draft a new will, my hand didn't shake. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel pain. I simply felt that I was doing something necessary, like fixing a door that hadn't closed properly for a long time. In the weeks that followed, we worked slowly. I went for medical checkups. I answered capacity assessments. I sat in front of a camera, spoke clearly with no one standing beside me. I explained my reasons in the most neutral tone I could. The hardest part wasn't signing the papers. The hardest part was not telling my children. There were moments when I wanted to speak up, to explain before everything became complicated. But then I remembered the interrupted calls, the repeated later, and I understood that if I spoke now, I would once again have to explain my feelings to people who were not ready to listen. I wasn't doing this to punish anyone. I was doing it to protect myself. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt that I was standing on my own side, calmly and without regret. After all the paperwork was prepared, I didn't feel the immediate relief I had expected. During the day, everything seemed fine. I did familiar things, went grocery shopping, cleaned the house, visited Helen when I could. But when night came, the house grew quieter than usual. There were nights when I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock in the kitchen ticking steadily. No footsteps, no ringing phone, just my own thoughts. One night, I sat up and picked up my phone. The screen glowed in the dark room. My contacts appeared quickly. Linda's name was at the top of the list. I tapped it. Then I stopped. I thought about her voice, about the phrases later, "I'm busy." I asked myself what I would say if Linda were to answer. Would I tell her everything? Or would I say that I was fine once again? I exited the call screen. I opened my contacts again. Mark. Then Emily. I lingered longer on Emily's name. I knew she would sense something in my voice, but I also knew that if I called, I would end up comforting her, when I was the one who needed comfort. I placed the phone on the bedside table. There were moments when I asked myself, was I being too hard? Was I overreacting to things that are simply part of modern life? Children are busy. Everyone is under pressure. Maybe I should understand more. Maybe I should wait. But then I thought back to the morning I called my children, when Helen had just received her diagnosis. I remembered standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, not knowing who to call next. I remembered the silence after those brief calls. I didn't feel angry when I thought about it. I just felt sad. And sad in an obvious, very lucid way. There's a difference between being understanding and erasing yourself. I had been understanding for a long time. Perhaps it was time for me to stop and ask what I needed. Those nights didn't change my decision, but they helped me understand more clearly why I had made it. Not because I wanted to cut ties, but I no longer wanted to remain in a relationship where my presence was always taken for granted. When I turned off the light and lay down, I didn't feel like a winner or a loser. I only felt that I was trying to live honestly with my own feelings for the first time in many years. Nothing exploded right away. It began very softly, so softly that, without paying attention, I might have missed it. The first call came from Linda, a few weeks after Helen's funeral. Her voice was gentler than usual, slightly cautious. "How have you been lately, Mom?" Linda asked. I said I was fine. I didn't say much. Linda didn't ask further. There was a brief pause, and then she continued, as if something had just occurred to her. "You still have the documents related to the summer house, right?" I asked. "Which documents?" "I mean, the ownership papers, insurance, things like that. I just thought, if something unexpected happens, we should know where to find them." I replied that everything was carefully stored. Linda said, "That's good," and ended the call. Nothing was obviously wrong, but I noticed that this was the first time in months Linda had called me without me calling first. A few days later, Mark sent a message, not to check in, just a link. "Take a look at this, Mom. Asset management services for seniors. I think it makes a lot of sense." I didn't open the link. I asked Mark why he sent it. He replied quickly, "I just think you should have someone to help, in case later on you don't want to handle those things yourself anymore." Mark's wording was familiar, practical, emotionless, not wrong, but he also didn't ask whether I wanted that. Before I could reply, Emily created a new group chat. It included only the four of us. Emily named the group Family. The first message was from Linda. "Mom, we think we should talk early about some important things, not because it's urgent, but so everything is clear and you don't have to worry." Mark followed. "Exactly. The sooner the better. You're not young anymore after all." Emily didn't say anything for a few minutes. Then she sent a thinking face emoji. That was all. The conversation continued, little by little. Linda talked about maintaining the summer house. Mark talked about taxes and expenses. Emily shared an article about how early planning helps families avoid conflict. No one mentioned dividing assets directly, but everyone spoke as if that decision had already been made, as if my role in the conversation was simply to provide information. One evening, Linda sent a photo of the summer house to the group, an old photo taken many years ago. "I think we should renovate the kitchen," Linda wrote. "The appliances are really outdated." Mark replied, "If we're going to renovate, we should do it sooner rather than later. It'll be less trouble down the road." Emily wrote, "What do you think, Mom?" I stared at that message for a long time. It was the first time in the entire exchange that I had been asked for my opinion, but the question came too late. After the discussion had already gone far, I replied briefly, "Right now, I don't want to change anything." No one objected, but no one stopped either. The messages that followed began to use phrases like, "When you don't want to manage things yourself anymore. Later on, do you need to make it easier for us?" Gradually, the assumptions became clearer and more transparent. Another night, Mark messaged me privately, "Mom, I'll be straightforward. If something happens later, we're the ones who will have to handle everything anyway, so preparing now is a good thing." I asked Mark, "Are you worried about me or about what you'll have to deal with later?" Mark didn't reply right away. After a while, his message appeared. Both. That answer didn't make me angry. It simply made me understand that everyone had started to see me through a different lens. No longer as their mother, no longer as a person living her own life, but as a future situation to be managed. What saddened me most wasn't the money. It was that no one asked how I was feeling. No one asked whether I was ready to talk about these things. No one asked whether I wanted to keep control or not. Everything was said in a reasonable, gentle tone, yet it pushed me out of the center of my own life. I fell silent in the group chat. I read, but I didn't reply. I let my children talk to each other. I let them continue planning step by step. And in that silence, I realized something very clearly. This had gone beyond concern. Money had begun to speak. And when money speaks, very few people still hear another person's feelings. They didn't call before coming. It was a weekend afternoon. I was reorganizing the kitchen cabinets when I heard a car pull into the yard. When I opened the door, all three of them were standing there. Linda was in front, Mark behind her, Emily walking more slowly, holding her bag, eyes downcast. They entered the house as if it were still familiar ground, a place where everything could proceed according to old habits. Linda placed a paper bag on the dining table. I immediately saw the stacks of documents inside. This time, they weren't just on a phone screen. "Mom," Linda said gently, "we just want to talk for a bit." I didn't invite them to sit, but they sat down anyway. Linda took out the papers and arranged them neatly. Mark slid a pen toward me. Emily sat quietly, both hands resting on her lap. "These are power of attorney documents," Linda said. "Nothing complicated, just so we can help you handle paperwork if needed." Mark added in his familiar practical tone, "You don't have to sign everything, it's just for emergencies, in case later on you're tired or don't want to deal with these things anymore." Emily looked up as if she wanted to say something, then fell silent again. "We're doing this for you," Linda said. "You shouldn't have to handle all this alone." I looked at the papers. They were carefully prepared. Tabs, notes, signature lines. "Who did you talk to about this?" I asked. Linda answered immediately. "We consulted a lawyer to do it properly." I turned to Emily. "Did you know about this from the beginning?" Emily nodded very slightly. "I did," she said, "but I thought, maybe we should talk to Mom first." Linda turned to Emily, her voice no longer as soft as before. "Emily, we already talked about this. Before or after, it's the same." Emily lowered her head. I saw her hands clench. I picked up one of the papers and read it line by line, not fast, not slow. I understood exactly what I was looking at. This wasn't just help. This was authority, the authority to decide, to sign on my behalf, to manage. "You want me to sign this right now?" I asked. "Just to get started," Mark said. "You can revoke it any time." I set the paper down. "No," I said. No one spoke right away. Linda leaned forward slightly. "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "We're not taking anything from you. We just want things to run smoothly." "Smoothly for whom?" I asked. Linda exhaled. Mark glanced at his watch. Emily looked at me, her eyes full of worry. "You're overreacting," Mark said. "This is very normal." "It may be normal for you," I said, "but it isn't normal for me." No one argued, but the air in the room had changed. Patience was wearing thin. Linda slid the pen toward me again. "Just sign it, then we can talk." I stood up. "You should go home," I said. Linda looked up, clearly surprised. "What did you say?" "Go home," I repeated. "I'm not signing anything today." Mark stood up first, his voice rising in pitch. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We don't have bad intentions." "I'm not saying you do," I said. "I'm saying I don't agree." Emily stood up after Mark, hesitant. She turned toward me, her lips moving as if to apologize, but she said nothing. Linda remained seated for a few seconds, then stood very slowly. "You'll regret this," she said. I'll take responsibility for that, I replied. They left quietly. No one slammed the door. But after the car drove away, I stood for a long time in the quiet kitchen. It wasn't a victory. It was simply a boundary being set for the first time. And I knew that once that boundary existed, nothing would be as simple as it had been before. The lake house had been part of my family for more than 30 years. It was where my children grew up every summer, where my husband once sat fishing for hours, where everyone believed the family would always remain a single, unified whole. Perhaps that was why my children assumed the place still belonged to them, in a natural way without needing to ask. They didn't tell me before they went there. I found out through a message in the family group chat, sent on a weekday afternoon. Linda wrote, "This weekend we're going up to the lake house. You don't need to worry about anything, Mom. We'll take care of cleaning." I stared at the message for a long time. There was no question mark, no request for permission, just a statement. Mark replied right away, "Yeah, it hasn't been properly taken care of in a while. A lot of things are pretty old." Emily replied more slowly, "I think we should explain it more clearly to Mom." Linda responded quickly, "Mom already knows. It's fine." I didn't reply. I didn't explain. I simply called my lawyer, Robert Klein. "They think they have the right," I said. Robert was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Then it's time to make things clear." On Saturday morning, I drove to the lake house earlier than usual. Robert arrived not long after. He brought his familiar briefcase. We sat in the living room where the light from the lake came in softly. I made coffee. My hands shook slightly, but my mind was clear. Around 10 o'clock, I heard cars pulling in. Not one, 3. They arrived with their families. I saw my grandchildren getting out of the cars, carrying bags and jackets. Linda was talking on her phone, apparently taking photos. Mark pointed toward the dock, saying something to his son. Emily walked more slowly behind them, looking around. They looked like people arriving for a weekend getaway. No one looked like someone coming to ask for permission. Linda tried to open the door with an old key. It didn't work. I had changed the locks a long time ago. Linda knocked, looking confused. "Mom, are you in there?" I opened the door. When Linda saw Robert sitting in the living room, his briefcase open on the table, her expression changed instantly. "Why is he here?" Linda asked. "Mrs. Margaret invited me," Robert said calmly. "Please, come in." They stepped inside, no longer as relaxed as they had been when they arrived. The atmosphere in the room sank. The children were guided outside into the yard. "What's going on?" Mark asked. Robert stood up and took a stack of papers from his briefcase. "We need to clarify some misunderstandings." Linda turned toward me. "What are you doing, Mom?" Before I could answer, Linda continued, her voice rising. "Mom isn't well. She's changed a lot in the past few months. We're just worried." That statement stopped me for a moment. "What are you saying?" I asked. "Mom isn't thinking clearly," Linda said. "The recent decisions, they're not like her before." Mark nodded, though he didn't speak. Emily stood still, her lips pressed tightly together. In that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. Not because I was afraid of them, but because I understood exactly where they were heading. Robert spoke, his voice firm. "Mrs. Margaret has undergone a full capacity evaluation." Linda shook her head. "Our mom has always been overly anxious. She might not realize it." Robert placed the file on the table. "These are the medical reports, cognitive assessments, video recordings of her explaining her decisions, clearly with no one present." Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. Mark looked at me, confusion in his eyes. Robert continued, "Mrs. Margaret is fully competent. These decisions were made thoughtfully and are legally valid." I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. "I am still me," I said. "You're just not used to me saying no." Emily looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. She wanted to say something, but Linda spoke first. "So you really did this?" Linda asked. "You're going to take everything away from us?" Robert answered for me. This house does not belong to you, and at this time, you have no right to use it." Silence fell over the living room. Mark clenched his fists. Linda looked around the house as if realizing for the first time that nothing here was within her grasp anymore. I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt sad. "You came here without asking me," I said. "You made plans without my consent. I'm simply making the boundary clear." No one argued anymore. The truth had been laid out, clearly, undeniably. They left more slowly than when they arrived. There was no laughter, no photos. Emily looked back at me one last time, her eyes full of conflict. When the cars disappeared, I sat down in a chair. Only then did my hands truly begin to shake. Robert rested his hand on the table. "You did very well," he said. I looked out at the lake. The water was still calm, but I knew that after that morning, nothing could ever return to the way it was before. We didn't stay long after everything was said at the lake house. There was no big argument. No one slammed the table or stormed out in anger. Just a long, heavy silence in which each person had to face what they had just heard. Robert gathered his papers, but before leaving, he asked if I wanted to say anything more to my children. I shook my head at first, then nodded slightly. "I just want to be clear," I said, "not to argue." Linda stood with her arms crossed, looking out the window. Mark sat down, his elbows resting on his knees. Emily stood closest to me but didn't touch me. I didn't read the will. I didn't need to. What needed to be said was already in it, unambiguous. I spoke only about the reason. "I didn't do this to punish you," I said. My voice was steady, neither shaking nor raised. "If I wanted to punish you, I would have done something different. I did this because I need to live the rest of my life with respect." Linda turned to look at me. "You're still our mother," she said. "You can't just because of a few misunderstandings." "You're still my children," I replied. "That hasn't changed. But a relationship can't exist on titles alone. It needs presence, listening, respect." Mark looked up. "Do you know how this will affect things?" "I do," I said. "I've thought about it a great deal." Emily finally spoke, her voice quiet. "Are you angry at us?" I looked at her. I thought about the times Emily sat silently in the kitchen, the unsent messages. "No," I said. "I'm not angry. I'm just tired." No one spoke after that. I continued slowly. The lake house, the money, the documents, all of those things are just means. What matters is how people treat each other when there's nothing left to take. In the past few months, I've understood very clearly where I stand. Linda lowered her head. Mark sighed. Emily wiped her eyes. "I choose where I am respected," I said. "Not the most crowded place, not the most familiar one, but the place where I don't have to explain why I deserve to be heard." I didn't ask my children to understand immediately. I didn't ask them to agree. I simply said what I needed to say. When they prepared to leave, I didn't walk them to the door, not out of coldness, but because I didn't want to turn that moment into an emotional performance. The door closed. The room grew quiet again. I sat down, feeling heavy-hearted, but without regret. There was no sense of victory, only a truth that had finally been placed where it belonged. And sometimes, as I had learned, living honestly with that truth is enough. After that day, my children left. None of them came back. There were no calls to explain, no angry messages, only silence. In the first few days, I still found myself picking up my phone every morning, not to call anyone but out of habit. Then I realized I no longer expected the screen to light up. No one asked what I was doing. No one needed me to fix something for them. I didn't cry much. I didn't sit and complain to the neighbors. I still went grocery shopping, still cooked for one, still watered the plants in the afternoon. Life on the outside didn't change much, but inside it was different. Some evenings I would hear the wind on the porch and think about the old family meals, not with regret, but simply to acknowledge that a chapter had ended. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. The emptiness didn't arrive like a hard blow. It came little by little. an empty chair, a smaller meal, a day passing without having to explain anything to anyone. I received a few check-in messages from acquaintances. Some told me I should soften my heart. Others said I had done the right thing. I didn't argue. I understood that everyone sees this story from their own perspective. There were nights when I lay awake thinking about my children. I wondered whether they were okay. I didn't wish for them to come back and apologize. I only hoped they would live decently with their own lives. That silence wasn't comfortable, but it no longer frightened me. It gave me space to breathe, to listen again to my own thoughts, something I had neglected for a very long time. After some time, I began spending more time with people who were truly present. Not many, but enough. I saw my niece more often. We drank tea and talked about ordinary things. No one asked whether I regretted anything. No one mentioned money. Just small conversations, but real ones. I returned to the old library where I used to work and joined a few community gatherings. I didn't try to fill my time. I let things move slowly. There were good days. There were sad days. But there was no day when I had to wonder whether I was being taken advantage of. I'm not saying life is perfect now. There are times when I still miss my children. Some holidays still bring a pang to my heart. But I no longer feel as alone as I once did, because I am no longer standing in relationships where my presence mattered only when there was something to take. Family is important. I still believe that, but I have also learned that respect is even more critical. Without respect, family becomes a burden. Compassion does not mean enduring without limits. Love does not mean always sacrificing yourself. Sometimes setting boundaries is the only way to preserve the goodness that remains within you. I don't hate my children. I don't wish harm upon them. I simply choose to live the rest of my life in a place where I am treated as a human being, not as a plan. I didn't lose my family. I simply stopped trying to hold on to relationships that I no longer wanted to stay in.